Hello and welcome back. In this video, to do something just a little bit different, I thought we'd take a look at the sort of equipment you might want to take with you on an overseas trip. And coming from Australia as we do, pretty much anywhere you want to go involves an airline flight somewhere. And of course we then have restrictions on the amount of carry-on luggage you can take with you. So in this video we're going to take a look at the sort of equipment I would take with me on that overseas trip. And the first thing we're going to talk about is obviously we need a camera body and we need a lens. And bearing in mind the weight restrictions, I do not have any 2.8 lenses. As primarily a landscape photographer, there's really no need for me to want to shoot at f2.8 because most of the time I'm going to be shooting at f8, f11 or smaller to gain depth of field. But the most important consideration for me is how much weight do I need to carry, because in some instances I'm going to be hiking around in the forest or somewhere out in the landscape and I don't want to be lugging a massive amount of gear. So in this instance I do not have any f2.8 lenses because for a landscape photographer an f2.8 lens really is of no value because we're going to be shooting at smaller apertures to maximise our depth of field in our photographs. So firstly we have a camera body, a lightweight mirrorless camera body with a lens that's a good universal go anywhere lens, a 24-200 or the equivalent in your camera system. This lens will do most jobs and it will do it pretty well. Is it as absolutely sharp as 70-200 f2.8? Probably not, but it's more than good enough. So the first thing is obviously one camera and a lens. And to be on the safe side, I would also take a spare body. In all the years I've been photographing, I've never had a camera body fail on me, but you never know. So just to be on the safe side, having a spare body would be an absolute must for me on an extended trip. And then following on from that, I would want to start with a wide angle lens because being a landscape photographer primarily, I'm going to want to shoot some wide landscapes. And in this instance, a smaller 14-30 zoom lens is lightweight, very good sharp lens and does the job. Yes, you could use a 14-24, but it's a much more expensive and a much heavier lens. So the next thing I would take with me, having got the wide angle and the mid-range zoom, if I wanted to perhaps look at doing some wildlife, I may want to take with me a longer zoom lens. And in this case, a 100-400 zoom lens would do the job nicely. It's not an absolute must-have. You could get away with a smaller lens. This is a 200mm lens, but if you do come across some wildlife, you may want to have a longer lens. And this one is a little bit heavy and a little bit more expensive, but if you really want to have that option available to you, that's what you'd need. Now once you have your basic kit put together, then you need to think about the accessories. Now, as a minimum, I would be taking one spare battery for each camera body, or in preference maybe two spare batteries, because the only real drawback with using a mirrorless camera over a DSLR is that they go through batteries a lot quicker. So if you're out in the field photographing a lot, you're going to want to have some spare batteries, and these spare batteries don't take up a lot of space or create a lot of extra weight, but they're very handy to have. And last but not least, in the camera equipment stakes, I would be taking with me a small flash gun, such as this little one. Not very powerful, but handy in the case of maybe some macro work or close-up work where I want to do a little bit of fill-in flash. There's no point in taking a really big, heavy, bulky flash unless you're particularly interested in doing some macro work in dark conditions. But a little small flash like this works very well and doesn't take up much weight. So next we'll have a look at the camera equipment and the accessories we're going to take. So now that we've looked at our basic photographic equipment, let's look at what we need to take with us in terms of computers and other backup devices. So let's clear the decks a little bit here, get these out of the way. And of course, when you're traveling, you're going to want to be able to download your photographs and view them on some other device. Looking at images on the back of the camera really isn't going to tell you how good the images look because you're looking at a JPEG preview and not the RAW file. So you're going to need something like a laptop to take with you. And preferably for travel, you're going to want a lightweight laptop. Now, a bit of a problem in recent years has been tendency of computer manufacturers like Apple and Dell and so forth to reduce the number of ports available on a laptop. Now, I don't know why they do this. Do they think that we're not going to connect anything to our laptop? And especially if you're going to want to connect a mouse and maybe a external hard drive and a card reader, you're going to need then to get something like a hub to be able to back up and download your devices. So that's a little bit of a problem, but fortunately I've managed to find a laptop manufacturer in Australia, a company called Venom Computers, who actually make a lightweight travel laptop with high performance that actually has a number of ports available. It even has an Ethernet port, USB ports, more USB ports, an HDMI outlet, and also a micro SD reader. So if you search around, you can find a suitable laptop. These all weigh about 1.7 kilograms. So in order to be able to view your images properly, you're going to need some sort of a device like a laptop. And then of course you're going to need a backup as well, because storing it on the computer is one thing. You'll need an external hard drive to back it up to. And I also use another device which is a standalone hard drive that I can use without a laptop. In case anything goes wrong with a laptop, I can actually download the image files onto this. I can't really view them, but this is a super safe backup option. But if you don't want to do that, you could certainly use this and maybe a second one just to be on the safe side and keep these separately from your other devices. So let's have a look now back in the studio at what the costs and the weights of all of these things are going to be. So back in the studio, let's have a look at how all that equipment stacks up in terms of overall weight, because the important thing when we're traveling is what we can carry on the plane, and most airlines have a weight limit of 7 kilos for carry-on luggage, and then plus a little bit extra for a separate handbag or laptop bag. So we'll have a look at all of these as we go along, but our preferred system is a full frame mirrorless system. So I've put in here and I'm using the Nikon system here because that's what I own myself, but your system would be equivalent using your own manufacturer's lenses. So starting off, we have a mirrorless body, and I've allowed for a spare body as well because that's what I would take with me. And then I would have my wide angle zoom lens, which was the 14 to 30 f4, my 24 to 200 f4 to 6.3 as my general purpose walk around lens, which is very compact and lightweight. But then for those possible larger tasks, such as picking out areas in the landscape or perhaps wildlife, I'd be looking at the 100 to 400 zoom. And if I add all of those up, and overall we're looking at a focal length range of 14 to 400 millimeters in this comparison. But adding all of those up, we end up with just under 3.9 kilograms. So not too bad, but let's have a look and see how the equivalent in the f2.8 lenses would be, because that's the system I wouldn't take with me because I think it's not usable for this type of work I do. But let's have a look for the comparison. So the same equivalent focal lengths, we've got the body plus a spare, same as before. And then instead of the other lens, we use a 14 to 24 f2.8, which is a bulkier lens and a little bit larger, but again f2.8. Then we would also need a 24 to 70 because we need to fill in these focal length ranges, again an f2.8. And then moving up to a 70 to 200 f2.8. Again, all of these are much heavier, but because I want to get to the 400 millimeter maximum focal length, I'd need to add in a 2x teleconverter into that to bring us up to the equivalent system. And when I add all of that up, it's just under 4.6 kilograms, so quite a lot of weight additional to that. But let's look at another comparison, and that is to take something a little more lightweight as a travel kit. This is just a theoretical exercise, so let's have a look at a Micro Four Thirds system, and in this case the OM system camera and lenses, and just see how that stacks up as a comparison. So starting with our camera body, again having a spare, we would need two bodies, And then looking at the lenses, I'm trying to find the nearest equivalent in the Olympus lenses that would be the 14 to 400 focal length range. So we've got, the nearest I could find is a 8 to 25, which is equivalent to a 16 to 50. Then we would add in the 12 to 100, which is equivalent to the 24 to 200. And then moving on to the larger zoom lens, 40 to 150, which is 80 to 300 equivalent. And again, because I'm not reaching that 400 millimeter focal length equivalent, I'm going to need to add in a 1.4 teleconverter to bring it up to the nearest equivalent. And putting all of those together, there's quite a weight saving using the smaller system, just over 3 kilograms. So let's now compare those three systems and also have a look at the cost of these systems. Now, I'm working on Australian prices as of December 2023. Your prices in your country may well be different, but I'm sure that they're roughly equivalent in terms of comparison. So firstly, we were looking at the full frame mirrorless kit with the f4 lenses. We're looking at a total of just under 3.9 kilograms. And to buy all that new, including the two bodies, you'd be looking at just over 17,000 Australian dollars. The equivalent using the f2.8 lenses, we're looking at 4.5 kilograms, so quite a big uplift in weight and a massive uplift in price, $22,250 odd dollars for the same kit using the f2.8 lenses. But then our third comparison was the Micro Four Thirds Olympus or OM Systems kit. We're looking at quite a lot of a weight saving there, just over 3 kilograms, and fairly substantial cost saving. So there are our three different systems. Now obviously, if we're using our existing camera kit, we're not going to be purchasing all of these new, but this is just an idea that I had, that just to give us an idea of the comparison of the weight and the cost of these systems. So if we were using the f4 system as against the f2.8 system, we'd be looking at about just over $5,000 saving over the 2.8 lenses and about just under 700 grams in weight saving. And that will become important when we look at the total package that we're going to put together and take on our trip with us. And of course, if we use the Micro Four Thirds system, you save quite a lot more money, nearly $6,000, and a little bit more weight. So that would be a consideration. If you're starting off afresh and you were only going to do travel, you might want to consider a smaller system. But then, of course, we've got other things that we've got to carry with us when we travel. So secondly, we have a second item allowed by most airlines, and some specify weight and some don't. But usually you're told that you've got one carry-on item plus a handbag or laptop. So I'm going to put in here our laptop, power supply, carry bag. We said the laptop itself was about 1.7 kilograms. By the time you add in the power supply and the bag, you're looking at about 2 to 2.5 kilograms. And then of course you need your backup drives. Now backup drives are pretty small and compact, so there's not a lot of weight in those. But then if you're traveling on an aeroplane, you're probably going to need to take with you something to read, maybe glasses to read with. You might want a tablet device, etc., etc. So you could be looking at a few bits and pieces more, and that would probably then add up to between 2.5 to a bit over 3 kilograms as your secondary carry-on item. And so far I've not ever had any of those weighed on an airline, but there's always a first time. But we're looking at our main camera bag, and that is our maximum allowance of 7 kilograms. Now, there are a couple of exceptions to that, but pretty much broadly, as far as I could see across the board, most airlines specify 7 kilograms maximum weight, and they also specify a maximum size for all of the dimensions of the bag. But let's just look at the equipment we're going to put in that. So if we come back to our full frame system, f4 lenses, 3.9 kilograms. By the time we add some chargers, battery chargers, filters, memory cards, card readers, bits and pieces, easily adds another kilogram. And then of course you need a camera bag to carry it all in, and these vary enormously, but let's say 2 to 2.5 kilograms for all of that. By the time we walk onto the check-in counter with our camera bag, you're looking at just a bit over the 7 kilogram limit. So you might find that you've got to pull some of those memory cards and other bits and pieces out and put them in your pockets or stuff them into your suitcase. But broadly speaking, you're just about on the limit of what you would be able to take with that system. But then, of course, then there's other things that you're going to need to take with you that would go into your checked luggage. So obviously your tripod, you're not normally allowed to carry a tripod as carry-on luggage these days, so that would go in your suitcase. And of course, you might want to put your backup drives in your suitcase or split them between other suitcases, and other things like lens cleaning kits and bits and pieces. And especially if you're traveling overseas to a different country, you're probably going to need to take a power board and plug adapters so that you can plug all of your equipment in, charge up your batteries while you're in a foreign country. And so that all adds up to bits and pieces. But the important thing to remember is that all of your batteries must be carried in your hand luggage, i.e. in your camera bag or your laptop bag, not in your suitcase. That's not allowed. And the smart thing to do is, if there's more than one of you traveling together, would be to split up your backup drives between two different suitcases, because I know it never happens, but occasionally a suitcase gets lost or misplaced, and as long as you have at least one backup with you, it's not going to be the end of the world if one goes missing for a while. We can only hope. So now let's put all this together and see how this all works out. So we've got our full frame kit, accessories and camera bag, looking at just over the weight limit, or alternatively our full frame f2.8 kit, it's going to be well over the weight limit, so potentially you could be in trouble there. You may then have to resort to putting one lens or a couple of lenses into your suitcase, which is not ideal but could be necessary depending on how strict they are with weighing your bags. But then your micro four thirds kit, you're generally quite safe with that. You're going to get in well under the limit. So yes, the 2.8 kit is going to be way over the limit, and that depends on whether it's checked. I've had our carry-on bags checked a number of times in different locations, and in other times they're not interested. So you just need to be careful with that. And of course, the other thing you need to consider is that whatever camera bag you're taking has to fit into those maximum dimensions that are allowed for your carry-on kit. I know that a lot of people try and push the limits, but if it came down to someone being very picky on the check-in, they may decide that your camera bag's too big to be allowed on, so better to keep it within the limits. So the choice really is the F4 kit or micro four thirds kit. Shouldn't be a problem for getting onto your carry-on bag and being able to carry that around and use it. But of course, it all really comes down at the end to, what you choose to take on your travels really will depend on what you want to photograph. So let's just have a think about what we would need to take and what use the different lenses would be. So starting with your wide angle lens, there are going to be scenarios where you're looking at a large landscape where you really want to put in the most possible into the frame, and you're going to need your super wide angle lens. And I would use that quite frequently for landscape photographs on travels. These are a couple that have been taken with that equivalent lens, and it's something that you would use quite a lot, I believe, on a landscape or general travel, particularly for inside buildings and so forth. So that would be a no-brainer for me. And then of course the second one, which was what I called my walk-around lens, 24 to 200, gives you plenty of options. If you're going to be walking around a city all day, you don't want to be lugging a super heavy kit, you just take the one lens, and it's a pretty versatile lens. That would probably work for most things. You can zoom in tight onto things to get detailed photographs, and you can still get it wide enough to get in some reasonable landscape sort of shots. And all sorts of different scenarios would work with that sort of system. But then if there's a possibility that there may be wildlife involved, or if there's going to be a situation where you want to pick out little parts of the landscape in front of you, the 100 to 400 lens or even a longer lens would be necessary in order to be able to get some worthwhile animal shots or wildlife shots. And these are just a couple of examples using that sort of a lens. And nothing more annoying than being away on a trip where there's some wonderful wildlife and you just can't get them large enough in the frame to make a useful photograph. So these are a couple of examples. What you want to do is ultimately, what interests you. But here's, I put this together as an idea to see just what would work as a travel kit, and I think it's been a little bit of an interesting exercise. So I hope that's been useful. Next time we'll probably have some more information on AI technologies that we're working on. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed that, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.